Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Rain Check podcast, the podcast covering all of the kings and queens of England. I'm Austin,
And I'm Donna.
and this week we will be covering Harold Godwinson, son of Godwin. And he was born in about 1022 in Wessex, England, which was essentially kind of the capital region of England, as we know. And he will reign for about from January 5th to October 14th, 1066. So
One of the shorter lived reigns.
quite short. He is obviously the son of Godwin, as I said, who is the Earl of Wessex, and I actually will talk a little bit about Godwin because we have mentioned him in passing, but we haven't really focused on him so far. And his mother
And
was Gaitha Thorkel's daughter.
and
So,
she was a Danish noblewoman and a very interesting and powerful woman in her own
right.
right.
I actually, yeah, she will come up again momentarily, actually. But just jumping in, one thing I feel like we've talked about obviously that this is kind of the end of the Viking era of England, and now it's going to be the Normans ruling. But I didn't quite realize that a lot of historians consider this time to essentially be the end of the Viking Age. So, right, the Vikings have been doing stuff all around Europe, but this is kind of the end, and we're essentially at the beginning of the actual medieval age. So Harold is also called Harold the Second. I'm trying to remember who would be Harold the First. Oh, yeah,
Harold,
Harefoot.
yeah,
Yeah.
Canute's son.
As I said, he's the last crowned Anglo-Saxon king, and basically he was a part of one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, noble families in England. Uh, as I said, his father Godwin was Earl of Wessex. He was made that by King Canute the Great. And let's see. I'm going to skip some of this because we're going to talk about it later. But just jumping in to Godwin, he was the son of this guy Wulfnoth, um, which sounds very Viking to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Who was a Thane and just a native of Sussex. I also found out today, I think the word Saxon means knife.
Mm.
Just random fact. And so Godwin, Earl of Wessex, husband Gaitha Thorkel's daughter, and right, she was a powerful woman, partially because she was the brother of Ulf, the Earl, who himself was married to Estrid Sven's daughter, which you can guess she was the daughter of King Sven Forkbeard and was the sister of King Canute the Great. So she is
So
the kind of the I'm trying to think like the what would that be? Your sister-in-law of Godwin
Canute.
of Godwin because it's Godwin's wife's brother's wife. So that's like your sister-in-law, right? So like we had been mentioning how Godwin had a lot of these Danish loyalties, and now I'm kind of seeing why, because he literally was related to a lot of
Hmm.
Danish people. And actually, Ulf and Estrid's son, so this is Godwin's nephew, would become King Sven the Second of Denmark. So I might actually release a special episode next week that's kind of about Sven the Second and Harold Hardrada and um, Godwin, maybe.
Yeah, because there was a lot going on in Scandinavia at that time, and it gets a little
Mhm,
confusing because there was so much back
mhm.
and forth.
But it's like
But
directly related to what's happening because we're going to see how Harold's going to invade very soon. But Godwin, basically, his political career started by supporting Edmund Ironside, the king, but then he quickly switched. So that was in 1016, and by 1018, he's already supporting King Canute, and he's the guy that names Godwin Earl of Wessex, and he remains Earl throughout the remainder of Canute's reign, and only
and
there's only one other
remember,
Earl.
he was he was the big supporter of Emma, and why Emma was able to reign in Winchester when Harold the First was nominally the King of England and Emma was ruling on behalf of her son Harthacnut because of the support of Godwin, until Godwin changed his loyalties yet again to Harold instead of to Emma. So he was
Right.
definitely someone that changed his loyalties a lot.
For sure. And he originally, so after Canute died, he originally supports, yeah, Harthacnut instead of who was supposed to be the successor, who was, sorry, instead of Harold Harefoot, who runs to the throne, he still was supporting Harthacnut, but he eventually, so then he's involved in that murder of Alfred Atheling, who's the half brother of Harthacnut and the younger brother of Edward the Confessor. And so then when Harold dies in 1040, Harthacnut comes onto the throne. And so then Godwin's kind of in trouble because he had murdered Alfred, but he gives, he swears his oath and he gives a large gift. And he's so powerful at this time that the king doesn't really have a choice but to really support him.
Mm-hmm.
So then when Harthacnut dies, Godwin really gets powerful because then he essentially has a big part to play in coronating Edward the Confessor, and then he marries Edward to his daughter, Edith. So then Godwin and his wife Gaitha have several children. They have six sons: Sven, Harold, who is the main character of this episode, Tostig, who we'll hear about, Garth, Lealfwine, and Wulfnoth, in that order. And then he had three daughters: Edith of Wessex, Gunhild, and Elfgifu, the most popular name of Anglo-Saxon England. And yeah, so Godwin's sin is just kind of an interesting, he's basically half Saxon, half Danish, or he literally is. And they had this manor of Bosham, was kind of their family manor. It was on the south coast of England, originally from the Archbishop of Canterbury. And it's, yeah, the family seat of Earl Godwin, and Harold will eventually take that over. And on the Bayeux Tapestry, it has two representations of this family residence. And it's only one of four places in England named on the tapestry. So that's Godwin.
Interesting.
So back to Harold, right? As I said, he was born in like 1022. We never really know much about the childhood or teenage years of these people, but in 1045, when Edith marries Edward, this is when around when Harold becomes Earl of East Anglia. And that might have been partially, he might have been appointed to help deal against the threat of King Magnus the Good in Norway. As we said, there's a lot happening in Norway and Denmark and Sweden at this time, and they're all fighting each other and allying with each other, and they kind of see England as becoming part of that sphere. So
Well, for
England
good
is,
reason, right?
yep,
They had the whole Northumbria area and they had King Canute and Harthacnut. So there's reason that if you were
definitely.
Scandinavian, you would think that you're going to add England to your kingdom. But I think it's around this time that Harold married Edith Swan Neck,
I didn't know
and
that
they think that
name.
they think Swan Neck was probably a corruption of an old English phrase that meant gentle swan. I
I
don't know
mean,
why they would call her a gentle swan, but
I could see both, I guess. I mean, I think a swan, like I think a lot of women would want to be compared to a swan. They're very graceful. But then
they
also
are
it seems like
graceful, yeah.
swan neck seems kind of self-explanatory. They have really long
Right,
skinny necks.
right.
And I do
Well,
think that might have been a point of like how they at a certain time women wanted to have really big foreheads and like pointy hats. Like I think having really slender, long features was maybe seen as beautiful.
maybe, but this is not a time, just to clarify, this is not a time when they were wearing tall hats. But
Right, right.
yes, long necks is very beautiful anyway, most people think. Anyway, they were married not in the Catholic Church, but they were married in the Danish manner, which is handfast is another word for it, which was completely recognized by the Anglo-Saxons and of course the Scandinavians as a legitimate marriage. So the people didn't have an issue with recognizing Edith as Harold's wife, but the church did. And so that a lot of church chroniclers call Edith or refer to Edith Swan Neck as his concubine or mistress. But she was considered his wife, and I
And
think
they were
they really
essentially
loved one
married,
another.
right? They were married his whole life until I think the very end. He officially marries in the Christian tradition.
They were married his entire life, and he also married another woman in the church, but he never set Edith Swan Neck aside. He just was married to two women at the same time.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
church,
well,
the church, of course, because they didn't recognize the marriage to Edith Swan Neck, didn't consider him to be a bigamist
right.
because they only recognized the one marriage, but he
They
was
would, I guess, see
technically,
him as cheating on his wife, sort of.
yeah,
So,
he technically never got divorced from Edith, and he still, I think, spent time with her. And they had five or six children, including two daughters that we'll talk about later.
yeah. Another thing, going off how I said he was the Earl of East Anglia, which obviously would be on the eastern side of England, so it makes sense that it's kind of the one that would be getting attacked by Norway. It's in the Danelaw, and it could send ships to attack that area. But it's believed that Harold led some of the ships that were sent to Sandwich in 1045 against Magnus, and Harold's elder brother Sven uh, is named Earl in 1043, and yeah, actually, so this is when he marries Edith the Fair, is another one of her nicknames. And she, I
Yeah.
don't know if you said this, but she was the heiress to lands in Cambridgeshire, Suffolk, and Essex,
She
which
was
were,
definitely, by 1066, she was one of the wealthiest landowners in England in her own right. And she had her estates recorded in multiple shires. So she didn't just get land from Harold, but as you mentioned, probably from her father or, other means.
right. And yeah, another name apparently for the Danish marriage is More Danico. I guess that's the Latin way to say it. And yeah, so like I said, Sven was made Earl, but then by 1047, he gets exiled from England because he abducts the abbess of Leominster, which I want to know more about why he does that.
Sven was a troublemaker.
Seems like it. And so then his lands get divided by Harold between Harold and and a cousin Bjorn, baby Bjorn. And in 1049, Harold was in command of some ships that were sent to aid Henry III, Holy Roman Emperor, against Baldwin V, Count of Flanders, who was in revolt
Wait,
against Henry.
he was against Baldwin of Flanders?
I
That's
believe
interesting.
that's what was weird. That is what I read, but then it seems like
Yeah.
he,
Because he
uh,
usually, I mean, I think he flees. Anyway, some of, like Emma fled to Baldwin of Flanders, but, loyalties change, as we said.
yeah, and if Henry's really powerful, maybe. Yeah, I would have to look more
Yeah,
into it.
Henry would have been powerful. Yeah.
And I guess while that's happening, Sven sees that he's distracted, so he returns to England and he tries to get a pardon, but Harold and Bjorn refuse it, and then Sven leaves, but he takes Bjorn hostage and later kills him. So he definitely was a troublemaker.
Yes.
And then a couple years later, Edward appointed an enemy of the Godwins, Robert, who we mentioned, Robert Jason or something. um, he becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury and then drives the whole family into exile, Godwin's whole family. But as we said, they build an army, they restore their positions and everything. So then Godwin dies in 1053, and Harold finally succeeds him as Earl of Wessex. And, he keeps all his other titles as well, I believe. And then soon after that, he drives back the Welsh, who apparently had burned Hereford. And then he becomes
And the
Earl of
Welsh,
Hereford.
The Welsh king that he defeats, he doesn't directly kill him, but Harold had been fighting with the Welsh for a few years, and someone did kill the Welsh king as part of this, whether it was on Harold's orders or if it's because he saw his own benefits. But this king that he killed, whose name is something like Gruffydd Llewellyn,
Mhm.
um, was
Yeah,
the first and perhaps the only Welsh king to unite all of Wales.
cool. Well,
Yeah.
it would be cool to do a once we're all done with this, go and do like Scotland and Wales and Ireland or something. But
And Griffith de Llewellyn's
Griffith up
wife
Llewellyn, yeah,
um, is the one that Harold is later going to marry.
interesting. So, yeah, so this is an interesting little side chapter that we're going to get to that actually is very important. So then, in 1064, Harold is apparently shipwrecked at this area, Ponthieu. Ponthieu. It's basically in Flanders, and there's a lot of speculation about this voyage. So there's this the there's some Norman chroniclers who state that King Edward had previously sent Robert of um,
Jumièges.
Jumièges to appoint as his heir Edward's kinsman, Duke William II of Normandy, and that at this later date that we're talking about, Harold was sent to swear fealty. So that's what some chroniclers said was why he was there. But then some disagree. Um, right? William does seem to believe that this does occur, but
Well,
um,
William of Malmesbury, writing the next century, says that Harold was simply on a fishing trip that got blown off course by a storm and was shipwrecked. But Eadmer, who was a monk who was alive during this period and is known to have consulted with a relative of Harold about at least some issues, stated that Harold had traveled to Normandy specifically to acquire the release of his brother Wulfnoth and his nephew Hakon, because Wulfnoth and Hakon had been held hostage in Normandy ever since this rebellion by Godwin that you mentioned earlier had taken place. And even though Godwin eventually came back and was forgiven, his son and his nephew were still kept hostage in Normandy. So of the different competing arguments as to what Harold was doing, I feel like that's the most logical one.
yeah, and it seems like it would be kind of an interesting story. I kind of like more of the story that he just he happens to get blown there in a storm, and then he lands and he's captured by Count Guy of Ponthieu and was then taken as hostage at the Count's castle. I can tell you at Brarain, 15 miles up the River Conch from its mouth at what is now Le Touquet. Pardon my French,
And
but
then Guy sent word to William, right?
yes. So then William arrives, and basically then William's like, "Hey, okay, like, I'm gonna release you, but you need to team up with me against my enemy, Conan II, Duke of Brittany." So this is where I thought this would just be such a nice setting for a little movie or something where
Mont
this
Saint
battle
Michel.
is out Mont Saint Michel, which I'd always seen in like Instagram pictures and stuff. It's just a really cool looking castle, and I was reading up more about how it actually was a pretty smart like defensive position because how the tides work, like any army that was trying to attack is eventually the water's going to rise up and they are going to have a hard time. So it's
Okay, but we're going to have an interesting story to talk about regarding Mont Saint Michel when we come to William II, William Rufus's rule, because William Rufus, when he's King of England, teams up with his eldest brother Robert, Duke of Normandy, to fight their youngest brother Henry, who will one day become Henry the First of England. And Henry is at Mont Saint Michel when this happens.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, here's another picture. Just like a crazy. I'm surprised you haven't ever been.
I know, I need to go.
So, yeah, some more backstory on it, real quick. Before there was really much, before there was at least, any sort of monastery built there, the island was called Mont Tombe. And according to legend, the archangel Michael appeared in 708 to Aubert of Ranches, the bishop, and instructed him to build a church on the rocky islet. And then later on, basically the king of the Franks was getting assaulted by the Vikings, so he agrees to give Mont Saint Michel to the Bretons in this Treaty of Compiègne. So that's why the Bretons are currently holding it at this time we're talking about. And yeah, so this is when William annexes in 933. William of Normandy annexes the whole peninsula from the weakened Duchy of Brittany. And
And Harold actually does fight for William and does a great job, and William praises his ability on the battlefield.
yeah, I don't know why I thought I had it, but yeah, there's a part of the Bayeux Tapestry where he is shown pulling some other soldiers out of this quicksand that's like at Mount Saint Michel has all this quicksand. So here I can actually show it. It has some writing on it, but see how this horse is falling over? And
Oh
then
yeah.
I don't know exactly who Harold is here, but apparently he's one of these guys. But yeah, so it's a weird little side adventure. But yeah, so then obviously so then they're kind of on the side of William after that point. And then so later on, William, once he takes over England, spoilers, he rewards
Well,
them with properties and grounds in England, including a small island off the southwestern coast of Cornwall, which was modeled after Mont Saint Michel and became a Norman priory named Saint Michael's Mount of Penzance.
but you're going to talk about the other major thing that Harold did in visiting William, right?
Yes, but this is that castle I just talked about. But yeah,
Oh, that's pretty.
it is really pretty. So yeah, back to Harold. Um, like I said, he saves those soldiers from the quicksand. They pursue Conan, Duke of Brittany. Um, they're all around, and then they eventually he gives them the fortress's keys. And so yeah, this is when William basically knights Harold. He gives him weapons and armor. And then, according to the Bayeux Tapestry and other sources, um, state that Harold then swore a oath on sacred relics to William to support his claim to the English throne. So that's pretty important, right? So this is still when Edward the Confessor is ruling, right? So that's why he's
Right.
saying, but when he dies, William's going to become king, right? And so then they immediately say when
And
Edward does die, they say that Harold broke his oath.
right, and it was a sacred oath.
Yeah, and apparently even the Pope, I think, doesn't initially support William until he says that this is what happens, and then he starts backing William's claim. And this is just a random note, but one of the chroniclers, Orderic Vitalis, this is what he said about Harold. He was distinguished by his great size and strength of body, his polished manners, his firmness of mind and command of words, by a ready wit and a variety of excellent qualities. But what availed so many gifts when good faith, the foundation of all virtues, was wanting? So I think he's mainly talking about him betraying his oath. That
Yeah, I think that from what we can tell, even from contemporary writers, Harold was a great soldier. He was a good politician. He was a very strategic thinker. And I think he was quite popular. People really liked him.
hmm yeah, he seems
Unlike most of his brothers, I mean, Tostig and Sven were both assholes. So,
It's funny you say that
um,
because literally the next thing I was going to say was that Earl Tostig, his brother, in 1065 doubles taxation and his people in Northumbria are very unhappy about that, so they rebel. And Harold actually supports the rebels, which is pretty crazy. But I guess it was just such a bad. He
And
knew it was such a dumb thing.
Tostig never forgives him. But Harold's like, again, strategically thinking, hey, I want the people of Northumbria on my side.
Yeah, and he replaces him with this guy Morcar, and it was Morcar's brother. Let me see, but um,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. So this is when, yeah, I'm trying to understand what I wrote here, but it says that it led to Harold's marriage alliance with the Northern Earls. Is this when? But he already married. I don't know why.
I don't, well, that must be the second
Oh, the
wife.
second wife. Yeah.
Yeah, because not only was she the widow of the Welsh king that was killed because of Harold, but she had her father must have been, her father could have been from Northumbria. I know that he was an important person, that she was from an important family, so maybe that's what that means by that
And it does
alliance.
kind of make sense that then the Northumbrians would really like you because you're like, wow, you turned against your own brother to help us. So
Right,
you must really
right.
like us. And then, yeah, like you said, Tostig never forgives him, and he ends up in an alliance with King Harald Hardrada of Norway. And if you understand, so Hardrada literally means hard ruler. So you probably don't want to mess with Hardrada. So then we're actually getting to his reign now. So all this has been pre his reign, but it's not very last very long. In 1065, Edward the Confessor falls into a coma without clarifying his preference for the succession. He dies on January 5th, 1066. And but according to the Vita Edwardi Regis, he briefly regains consciousness and commending his widow and the kingdom to Harold's protection.
Of course, the only people that heard him at his deathbed were Harold and Harold's sister Edith, who was
Mhm.
Edward's wife, and possibly a bishop or something. But yeah, so no one really knows.
It's interesting because yeah, in the I haven't caught up, but in season one of House of the Dragon, there's a part where the king is dying, and he tells this one woman, I forget how he's related, but he confuses her. He's like really sick, so he confuses her with someone else, and he tells her something, and it causes all this drama. But I'm sure that happens so often where the king is on his deathbed, and it's not like there's going to be 20 people in his room all the time. So
Right.
it would make sense that, oh, there were only two people when he died, so you kind of got to trust us, but we're very biased at the
Hmm.
same time. So
What's interesting, though, also, because there were various competitors for the office, right? I mean, Harold had no real claim on the office other than he was the most powerful earl, but he certainly had no blood claim. William had a blood claim, and at least theoretically, Edward had named him as his successor in some years past, and Harold had sworn to that. And then there's also the Atheling, the son of Edward the Exile, who was an Anglo-Saxon relative of Edward's and had the blood. So, but nonetheless, I remember how other kings that we've been talking about recently, it was as much as a year or more before they actually were crowned officially.
yeah.
But the Witan announces Harold as king and then crowns him the very next day.
Right, I did see that. Yeah, they think that right Normans are going to point at that and be like, "Look, that's suspicious. That doesn't make sense." But apparently, it's possible that that would have just happened because all the nobles were present at Westminster already for the Feast of the Epiphany. So that's their point of view. It's sort I'm thinking
Oh,
now.
I just feel like there's a Feast of the Epiphany every year. But why did I don't know, Harold and Harthacnut and Athelred the Unready, a lot of these kings we've talked about were waiting a year, 2 years, I think one of them 3 years to be crowned officially. But
Yeah,
anyway, they did it
yeah,
very quickly, and he was the first king to be crowned in Westminster Abbey.
right. Because it was built by Edward, the guy before. And yeah, basically, once William hears this, he's pretty mad. And he immediately starts building up about 700 warships and on the coast of Normandy at Dives-sur-Mer. And initially, as I said, William struggles to gain support, but after saying the whole sacred oath thing, Pope Alexander II firmly declares William the rightful heir to the throne.
And
That's
gives
such
him
an
the papal banner to carry with him.
yeah, that's always such an interesting part, I feel like, is the Pope is, he still is impactful today, but just back then he was so powerful. He could decide, he could do the
For
Crusades, he could
sure.
decide who was the king. It's kind of nice though. He was almost the original like UN, where he was like the international like peacemaker kind of guy. So,
But William, just to give a shout out to William, well, I'm sure you're going to talk about this, but he did gather all of his forces and he gathered many ships, ships to hold them in, and many, many horses, because unlike the English, the Normans had a lot of knights that fought on horseback. And it's not easy to get horses on ships. You had to have a special kind of ship, which you had to have specially built. His wife Matilda paid for the lead ship to be built for her husband. That was, the best ship available. But he had to wait for favorable winds in order to sail the North Sea. While he was waiting, he has all these men and all these horses in a fairly small area that he has to feed without so pissing off the people that live there, who are his people, the Normans, that they, turn against him. So I think we have to give him a shout out for doing such a good job, because he was there for months and months waiting for the wind to turn. And yet he managed to make sure that his men and the horses were fed and
mhm.
occupied and didn't rebel, didn't leave him while they were waiting to go on this definitely risky journey.
Yeah, I think it's 7 months they were just sitting in port. And yeah, I didn't even think about all the horses, but now I want to look into what that would actually look like. Like, is there sort of one section of the boat that all the horses are in, or are they each in their little stall? Or I just wonder, because I'm sure the horses also get freaked out by being on the ocean.
Right.
And yeah, basically the French or the Normans essentially they're like first knights, right? They sort of invent the concept of like riding on a horse and wearing
Mm-hmm.
armor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, let's see. Basically, but it also works out for William because even though it
It
seems
does work out.
because if he had
It's like
invaded
that thing
immediately,
where it's like that thing where you talk about what you think is bad news, but then it turns out that it's good news. And then what you think is good news, oh, whoops, actually turns out to be bad news. This is a case
yeah,
of what looks to be bad news. What the fuck? When is the wind ever going to change? Turns out to work in his favor.
yeah, not to get too dark, but it just reminds me of like when you hear about these people where they like slept in late and missed their flight and they would have been like on the flight to like 9/11, like crashed into the World Trade Center kind of thing. Like you're like, "Oh no, I missed my flight," but it's actually like the best thing that ever happened to you. So yeah, because if
And
if
just,
William,
I'm going to take over. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, and you can take over because you know a lot more about William, but I was just gonna say that, yeah, just to say it out loud, if he had invaded immediately, then Harold could have just taken William first, might have won because you're always gonna have the home team advantage. Like we said, they're invading on these boats and everything,
Yeah,
and
because what
yeah,
I was just going to fill in before you
yeah,
finish is that Harold anticipated that William was going to. Everyone, I mean, William had been fighting wars since he was about 14 years old. He had won the duchy. He had inherited the duchy, but as a bastard, he had, obviously weaker claim. So a lot of the Norman nobility were trying to maybe find someone else to be the duke, maybe themselves. And they were killing his guardians and they were after him all the time. And so at 14, he had to fight a big battle to basically end the talk on the subject, and everyone had to agree that yeah, you can be the duke. And ever since then, the Normans were always like and always fighting. So he was a very seasoned warrior, and Harold knew he was going to have a tough fight on his hands. And because Harold was a very good warrior as well, he was totally prepared. He called, he had his his permanent kind of army, his housecarls that were with him, but then the people of England, ever since Alfred the Great, I think, set the system up. They had a system where you could be called in and you had to fight for your king, but then you were
Mhm.
able to go home for the harvest. And so he had called all the men to be ready around the places that people, the attack from Normandy would probably come. And they had been standing there waiting to fight him all these 7 months, not understanding why he wasn't coming. I mean, maybe they could see what way the wind was blowing as well, but they were still like anticipating, and it wasn't happening as what happening. And finally, because these men had to get the harvest in,
Mhm.
Harold allowed them to go home.
Yeah. Oh my God. I know it's so like I don't know what word, but it's like sad, I guess, where it's just like on September 8th, yeah, the provisions are running out, all this stuff. Harold disbands his army and returns to London. And then the same day, the invading force of Harald Hardrada of I think Denmark, uh, accompanied by Tostig, lands at the mouth of the Tyne. So
Way up in the north,
up in the
yes.
north, and basically their forces defeat the English earls Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria at the Battle of Fulford. And then so Harold's like, okay, and then he's like, all right, just kidding, guys. Like, too bad about the harvest. Come on, like, and they force march up from London. They get to Yorkshire in 4 days.
Which was incredible. No one thought they could make it there that fast, including Harold Hardrada and Tostig.
It is crazy to think about. Like, even if you imagine just kind of for fun, just going on a walk, and you're like, I'm gonna walk from like London to Northumbria in 4 days, and you're wearing
Right.
armor and all this stuff. It's great.
Yeah. Carrying yeah, it's bad.
But they do actually
So,
catch Hardrada by surprise. I'm not sure why he would be so
yeah,
surprised, but
well, because it was so fast. They didn't think
right.
that he could get there so fast. And so I can't remember everything, but they were on their ships, kind of anchored at the mouth of this river, and they had gone off to towards York. And I think they were just like, I don't know, just tooling around, checking out, see what they could take, and they weren't wearing most of them weren't wearing their armor because they weren't at
Mhm.
all. I mean, obviously they knew Harold was going to fight them, but they were take there's no way they thought that he could be there that quickly. So they just weren't anticipating it that day. And then when they saw and heard the men approaching, they had some of them run back to the ships because a lot of the men were still in the ships and
Mhm.
tell them, "Oh, you got to come, you got to come, you got to come." And so they tried to run, but they were just in big trouble because of being taken by surprise.
Wow. Yeah, so there's this battle of Stamford Bridge where Harold defeats Hardrada and Tostig. They're both killed.
And they were like, I think it was the Herald's people that were actually under the bridge, like stabbing their lances and swords and stuff up into the men that were on the bridge. And all these people were drowning because, if you get it caught in the water when you have this armor on, it's almost impossible to get out of the water. So it was a very dramatic battle
Yeah, that sounds
and
crazy.
exhausting.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've probably brought this up before, but this movie, The King, that has Timothy Chalamet, I think he's King Henry the Fourth. But it was the first time I've seen a movie that was medieval combat that felt really realistic to me and just how brutal it would be. And, obviously you're using your sword a lot, but in this movie, it's showing a lot of them were just punching each other. Like just you're wearing your male armor and you're just like punching each other. I mean, this would have been before everyone's wearing like really heavy armor, but
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
not,
you're just
it's,
wearing chainmail like you do, Avon.
and I feel like Game of Thrones sometimes, yeah, would have good examples of just battles where it's just so like I don't know. It almost feels like a big like brawl at like a high school, but you're all wearing armor. Like it just feels so chaotic and not like how you imagine of like the knights in shining armor and they're just like very noble or whatever. So anyway,
So
there's a
Harold is
story.
like, woohoo! I mean, he must have felt a
Right.
little bit bad about killing his brother. I'm not sure. But he had to have been so excited to have been able to win that battle.
Yeah. I think yeah, I know it's an interesting dynamic because it's like, well, hey, I was just raising the taxes. Why did you have to like exile me from the country, but then also then going from that to now I'm going to ally with your greatest enemy and try to take over. It was just a different time. Like when you were brothers with someone and you were powerful, it really was more of a rival than a buddy, I feel like. But there's this little anecdote that probably isn't true, but I thought it was a fun little like folk tale. So, according to Snorri Sturluson, um, before the battle, a single man rode up alone to Harald Hardrada and Tostig. He gave no name, but spoke to Tostig, offering the return of his earldom if he would turn against Hardrada. Tostig asked what his brother Harald would be willing to give Hardrada for his trouble. The writer replied, 7 feet of English ground, as he is taller than other men. Then he rode back to the English host. Hardrada was impressed by the writer's boldness and asked Tostig who he was. Tostig replied that the writer was Harald Godwinson himself. That's
I've
a
heard
cool
that
story.
story. That'd be kind of cool, yeah.
Um,
7 feet of English soil. I like that.
yeah. So
So
as we're
Harold's now he's set, right? He's defeated
right,
his enemy, and William
yeah,
never shows up.
I know. I do wonder what he's thinking. Like, okay, like, whew, like that was close, but at least I wonder if he was still going to disband the army, or if he's like, now let's
I
sort of.
think so because back in the day, you didn't really fight during harvest time or the
Mhm.
winter. You know, it was just the fighting. There's kind of a season to fighting. So
He
I
probably
feel
thought
pretty
William.
confident that he thought it would be next year that
Because
we'd
that's
have to
kind of what
worry about
happened
it.
with Harthacnut was that he got so distracted in Denmark. It was like 2 or 3 years before he even actually tried to take over. So yeah, as we've said dozens of times on this podcast before, so on September 12th, 1066, William's fleet sailed from Normandy. Several ships sank in the storms. They had to take shelter in Saint Valery sur Somme and wait for the wind to change. Then on September 27th, they heading to England. They arrive the following day in at Pevensey on the coast of East Sussex. Harold's army marched 240 miles to intercept William, who had about 7,000 men. And
Well, and remember, they had just marched for 4 days from London to Northumbria,
I
and then
know
they
I
had
would
to
be
turn
so
around
mad.
and march the opposite direction. And there are a lot of people in hindsight that say Harold would have been much better off if he had exercised patience, gone back to London, let his people rest up, and then let William come to him instead of
Mhm.
him going to William, but we'll never know.
Yeah, and you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself because you just won the earlier battle, but I don't know. I just have this memory. I don't remember the specifics, but I was on this like 2 week backpacking trip of Boy Scouts, and and almost every day you're hiking like 10 miles, and there was one day where we thought we were there, but then we still had like 5 more miles or something, and even that was just such a bad feeling of just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like I'm already so tired. I'm hungry. It's like getting late, and I have to go like so much longer. So, yes, the two armies are clash at the Battle of Hastings, where Harold had hastily built some earthworks, some kind of bunkers and things. It's near the present town of Battle, which is named after this battle.
Which I
And
was going to go to for the reenactment, but I had a client schedule a hearing on that week, and I had to cancel my trip to battle to see the battle. And I will never forgive them. And it's a very long story. I won't go into any further, but I still have resentment about that.
that is messed up. Hopefully they reenact it again. But yeah, so it's on October 14th, a faithful day in Hastings. There's 9 hours of hard fighting. Again, you're doing all this hiking and now you're just fighting for 9 hours.
Yeah, and what Harold was really good at, what the English were good at, was they formed a shield wall. So they were on top of the hill, and they had a very strong shield wall. So William's men had to go uphill, and they couldn't break the wall. So they were pounding and pounding and pounding, but they just weren't able to break the wall. And like you said, 9 hours is a very, very long battle at any time, but it was
Hmm.
really long for them. And at one point, some of the Normans thought that there was a rumor spreading that William had died, and they were starting to disperse. But William took off his helmet and said, I'm here," and exposed himself. And so they regathered. But then, either to fake it as a strategic move or for other reasons, some of the Normans started retreating. And when the English saw this, some of them, despite Harold telling them not to, broke ranks, left the shield wall, and started taking out after the Normans. And
Hmm.
that was their down.
Because then the Normans stopped retreating, and right.
Because then they stopped their fake retreat or their real retreat, but they turned around, and then because the shield wall wasn't no longer impenetrable, there were breaks in it, they were able to get in with their arrows and their lances, because they, like I said, they were on horseback charging with lances, and they could ram them, and yeah, they were able to prevail because of the
Ugh,
shield wall breaking.
I know that's so sad, but you kind of see how the soldiers would be so rattled by this point, and they're just like finally like, yes, they're retreating, and then you're like, you're feeling so confident. And you got to like one thing that also it made me that movie showed because it's Timothy Chalamet, so it just makes you think about how young all these people are. They're all like the oldest guy is like 32, like they're just all these young teenagers and stuff. So yeah, there's
And we
another.
don't know, was Harold killed by an arrow? I mean, there's a scene that you're showing in the Bayeux Tapestry, and everyone's always said he was killed by an arrow, and that's what that scene is showing. But now there's debate as to whether that's really Harold and was he killed instead by another means or whatever. But the bottom line is he was killed.
It is really weird. I read somewhere that maybe this arrow was added on in like the 19th century or something. And it does look very like light, like I could see how that's possible, but at the same time, it obviously looks like he's holding the arrow that's like in his eye. I just don't see why they would make that up. Like, why can't he just die with an arrow? Why is that? I just don't get it. But yeah, I did see that. So yeah, and then there's other legends that Harold didn't actually die at Hastings, but fled England and lived as a hermit in like Chester or Canterbury, but that seems pretty unlikely. I mean, I guess it's possible to escape a battle in the chaos, but when you're the king, I don't know.
Yeah, and
But
I mean, the battle ended because everyone thought the king was killed. So I think he
hmm
was killed.
I think
And
he was
then
probably
after the, and his body, they say, was mutilated, and Edith Swan Neck. Well, his mother, Gwyneth, came to beg William for her son's body, and she offered him a lot of gold, the rumor has it, but William refused it. And Edith Swan Neck searched around the battlefield until she was able to identify Harold from like a birthmark or something that
right.
she knew made her know that it was him.
Yeah. Yeah, it says here that yeah, like you said, Edith the Fair took her husband to the church at Waltham Holy Cross to be buried. That's the traditional story of what she did. Um, and then it says that, yeah, his newer wife, the more like, I guess, quote unquote, legitimate wife, Eldgith, was pregnant and got collected from London by her brothers, the Northern Earls Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria. So I guess that's what's weird. It's saying here they lost that battle, as I said, against Harold Hardrada, but I guess they didn't get killed, and then they came and saved their
No,
sister.
no, her brothers, his
No, I
wife's
know,
brothers.
but it was Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria who lost that when
Yeah, but
Harold.
those weren't her brothers. I think those are different people than her brothers.
That's what I'm reading, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a minor.
Okay.
It's just all this random stuff that people don't really know about what happened. Some people say that Harold and Eldgith didn't have any kids. Others say they had two children, Harold and Wolf, um, and they were probably twins if they did exist. And another possibility is that Ulf was the son of Edith the Fair or Edith Swanneck, and
So I
um,
want to talk about their two, Edith Swanneck and Harold's two daughters, but first I want to briefly say something else about his mother.
okay.
So after Harold was defeated, Gwentha lost four. She had lost four sons in a month because she lost Tostig,
Mm-hmm.
um, in the in that battle, and then she lost Harold and two of his brothers that were fighting with him in the Battle of Hastings. So four sons gone within like 2 weeks. But she didn't give up, and she instead went to Exeter and apparently was a driving force behind Exeter's rebellion against William the following year. William besieged Exeter in 1068, and they held out for 3 weeks before ultimately falling, and Gwyneth escaped. But I think it's interesting that she wasn't ready to give up the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then
Yeah.
my stories about his Harold's daughters with Edith Swanneck, there was Getha, named after his mom, and she ended up marrying into the ruling house of the Kiev Russians.
Yeah, the Kievan
And
Rus, I think.
right, Vladimir II Monomakh, the Prince of Smolensk, a city which is now in Western Russia.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I mention that is because her son was the last ruler of the United Kievan Rus, which
Hmm.
I guess was that
They're,
part
they're
of
like the
Russia.
precursors to the Russians. Yeah.
Okay, and through him, she became the ancestor. She is the ancestor of Philippa of Hainault, who was the mother of King Edward III of England. So ultimately, Harold's blood through his daughter flows into the current English royal family through
That's
Edward
nice.
III.
That's
Hmm.
cool.
So that's Gintha.
And
And
that's
then
that's Harold's mom, right?
That's Harold's mom, but also his daughter. He named his
And
daughter
his
after
daughter.
his mother.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's the daughter that married the Russian.
The Russian guy. Okay.
And then Gunhild had been sent to Wilton Abbey either before or after the battle, we're not sure which, and she lived
Wait,
there
sorry.
for quite a while.
That's his other
It's
daughter?
another daughter with Edith
Okay.
Swanneck, Gunhild. And remember, Wilton Abbey was where Edith, the wife of Edward the Confessor, had been, and a lot of queens supported that abbey. And they don't think she ever really took vows to be a nun. She just was living in this convent as kind of a protective measure. And at some point, after living there for years, possibly decades, around 1093, she leaves Wilton Abbey and marries Alan the Red, who was one of the wealthiest Norman magnates in England. He was from Brittany. And that really pissed off the Archbishop because he thought it was inappropriate for someone that had been at the Abbey for so long to be married. So he wrote a damning letter about her. So his
Wait,
daughters we know about, but his sons we don't know anything about.
interesting. Yeah, it just seems like they probably either just somehow got killed or scattered and just sort of you wouldn't really want to be known as the son of a fallen
Right,
king or whatever. They might try to kill you. So,
right.
yep, there's a lot of random theories, just like there's someone thinks that Harold was actually betrothed to Adeliza, a daughter of William, uh,
Yeah.
which is kind of random. And
Yeah, that's one
yeah,
reason people give for why was Harold in Normandy in 1064, and some people say it's because he went to try to arrange this marriage with Adeliza. Poor Adeliza, she was engaged multiple times but never actually married. She died young.
oh wow. And yeah, another random note before we wrap it up is that I read that his son Ulf was, along with Morcar and two others, were released from prison by King William, I guess, as he lay dying in 1087. So much later, he's like, "Oh, I'll be nice and release these guys," like 20 years later. And then apparently Ulf threw in his lot with Robert Curthouse, your favorite guy, and who knighted Ulf but then he disappears from history. And then apparently for two of Harold's other sons, Godwin and Edmund, they actually invaded England in 1068 and 1069 with the aid of Diarmait Mac Mael na Mbio, the High King of Ireland, but they were defeated at the Battle of Northam in Devon in 1069. Well, this was quite an episode. We're almost at an hour, and we're not even at William. So at least next episode, we kind of already talked about the Battle of Hastings, so we can focus more on
Hmm.
William's earlier life and his actual reign. But was there anything you wanted to say about old Harold?
I could save this to the William episode, but since we're talking about the Battle of Hastings, there's a poet who wrote a poem years later who said the real reason that William won the Battle of Hastings was not because Harold's men were tired, or it was not because William had the papal banner, but rather was because God had wanted Adela to be born of fully royal blood. So he needed William to be king so that his next child, who happened to be Adela, would be fully royal.
But she doesn't even become like queen or something. Why does she need to be so
But none the
royal? She's
because
just
she's
that
just an
important.
amazing person. Yes. The most important person in this entire podcast, to be honest.
All right. Well, yeah, maybe what we were talking about, maybe we'll do a special episode someday about Adela, who's William's daughter, and we've been hearing about a lot. And you might see a special episode in your podcast feed in a week after this, potentially about Harold Hardrada. Who knows? Maybe it'll be about King Arthur again. But um, join
And I
us.
will say also, if you're interested in the Bayeux Tapestry, I mean, it's normally on display in Bayeux in Normandy, but this year it's being displayed in England. And apparently they had pre-sales go on last week. And I believe this is correct, that they had the largest number of tickets sold in one day ever in the history of the museum. I think it's the British History Museum, the British Museum, with people wanting to see tickets to the Bayeux Tapestry.
Is it still there, or where is it
It's
now?
just in England. It's making a special trip over to England for display this year. I don't know if it's I don't think it's up yet, but soon it will be available to view in London for a year.
But it's normally in the Louvre.
No, it's normally in Bayeux, in the Bayeux Cathedral, Bayeux Museum in Bayeux.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so we'll see. Basically, kind of works out. I will be in France next week. We're gonna try to still get an episode out. We'll
Yay!
have to see, but kind of is perfect timing, right? As the French are conquering England, I'm gonna visit France.
Yes,
Just go check
sounds
out what's
good.
going on over there.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Follow us on Instagram at RainCheckPod. We're on YouTube. Please subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a comment. We'll read. If I get a comment, I'll read it on the next episode. We'll respond to it. Until next time,
Au
this has been
revoir.
Rain Check Podcast. Goodbye.
Bye.